Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Colin Kincaid, Chief Technology Officer for Cisco Service Provider.
Good afternoon. It's really great to be here at Cisco Live in Melbourne for Cisco Live APJ. And today we're going to do I think it's the final innovation talk of the day. We're going to talk about 5G monetization, which is really about how do you make money with 5G. And this is probably one of the greatest questions that people are asking. And we're going to go through how we're thinking about it, how we want you to think about it, and what the real opportunity is. But first, I'm going to start out with a little bit of a story, which is, if you're not aware, there was the Kramer Prize. The Kramer Prize was established in 1959 by Henry Kramer for flights that was 100% man-powered. The rules were that you would get 50,000 pounds if you could fly a figure-8 through around 2 poles, which were about 4,000 meters apart. You had to fly at least 5 meters off the ground. The aircraft had to be 100% human-powered, which pretty much means pedaling in order to drive that forward. That prize had about 50 attempts by all of the major aviation companies. So you have to remember that 1959, when that was established, aeronautics and commercial air travel existed. So there was a lot of aeronautical engineers. There was a lot of people working in the field. That's when we were starting to look at things like NASA. And after 50 attempts over 17 years, no one had accomplished that, to be able to fly that figure-8. This was a tremendous issue. Then Paul MacCready came along in 1976, and he looked at what was going on, and he came to this conclusion that the problem is nobody understands the problem. Now, Paul MacCready also had a problem, which was he was $100,000 in debt, and at the time, if you look at 50,000 pounds, that happened to be about 100,000 US dollars. So therefore, the sort of coincidence, maybe not. I think really how he approached this. And what he did was look at all of the previous attempts and came to a number of conclusions. That they were very much focused on flying, as opposed to figuring out how to fly. And that he focused on building a plane that he could repair quickly. Because most of the other competitors in this were getting 1 flight a year in trying to do this. Or they would get a plane, the plane would take off, and the person pedaling to drive the propeller would get so tired after about 1,000 meters they'd have to land. So there was a problem with the human wasn't able to endure what they were trying to get off the ground. And they also were making the planes so that they were using a lot of traditional aeronautics. Because he realized that every time you put in something that moves with gears and wires, that's weight. The weight makes it harder for the human to drive it, because the human endurance is limited entirely by the weight that they have to lift. And so he focused on building a plane that he could repair quickly, something he could repair in hours. Whereas most of the other ones, they would spend a year of engineering, get it up in the air, and it would either just be a complete failure because the person couldn't push it far enough, or it would crash, and then they'd come back a year later to try it. The other was that he was really trying to be able to get as many tests as he could so he could learn. This idea of rapid learning. The more tries meant more learning, more that he could understand the problem. He had to learn more about what a human could do, because not only did you have to pedal, but you had to fly the plane. You had to make a turn. You had to take off. You had to land. And doing that while you're pedaling was extremely difficult, finding out what the limits of what a person could do simultaneously. He also had to learn all about aeronautics sort of all over again. What he actually came to the conclusion was that rather than looking at modern aeronautics, he had to go back and look at what the Wright Brothers had originally done with their flight, which was just warping the wings in order to make turns rather than using flaps, because it reduced the weight to just be able to warp the wings. And the result was that after 300 attempts by him in less than a year, he learned enough and he went on to win the prize. So in 1 year, 300 attempts compared to most people's having 10 or less attempts over 16 years. The amount of learning he was able to do in that time is incredible. The fast repair enabled him to do much more experimentation. And then 6 months after winning the first Kramer Prize, he won a second Kramer Prize, which was for man-powered flight across the English Channel. So he really invested everything in this, the Gossamer Condor, which was the plane that he built, and followed by the Gossamer Albatross, which is the one that crossed the English Channel. So what does this have to do with 5G? Why are we talking about 5G and monetization? Because 5G is just putting up some new radios and keeping going on, and you just make money by keeping to charge people for what they've been paying for already, right? Well, I think that everybody starts to understand that it's a lot more than that, because investing in all of that new radio, you have to have new revenue sources to pay off for that as part of the industry. So let's take a look. If we look at industry surveys, the important thing to note there is 71%, this is a survey from last year, so this is sort of current information. 71% of telecom operators say that the #1 challenge is they don't understand what the new business model is for getting money back or new money on 5G. So that's a pretty significant one. If you look at the next line, it's actually 59% say that the biggest barrier to them is the investment required. So if you put into perspective, I don't know how to make new money, and it's going to take me a lot of money to build it, that's a significant challenge. So I think, once again, we say, do we really understand the challenge here? At the same time, you know, there was a lot of thinking about, if you look at where 5G came out, it was all about the consumer. We're going to get faster consumer handsets. Your phones are going to work faster. Everybody's going to have gigabit to your phones, but you don't need gigabit to your phone. And you're not going to pay more for it. You already have gone to unlimited data plans. You already have pretty high speeds. You're not going to start paying more. And we really say that if we look at, again, this is from GSMA, 69% of global operators believe that the new money will have to come from B2B businesses, so serving businesses and enterprises rather than from the traditional spaces they come from. Now, at the same time, if we look at the surveys, when we look at where revenue is today in verticals and in industries, it's a very small percentage of the total revenue. And the general belief is that that's going to expand out, but it's also going to be very much along verticals. So it's not just going to be like we'd make something for enterprise and we're done. It's something that has to be looked at in terms of something for automotive, something for manufacturing, something for mining, something for healthcare. These are the types of areas that we have to look at. So we really see that the pervasive belief is that the monetization of 5G isn't going to just come from what are now traditional services, but it's really an extension into the B2B and into the overall enterprises and vertical markets. Now, if we look at the enhanced capabilities of 5G, we see all the things that are touted: low latency, high data rates, slicing, sort of capacity, mobile edge computing, and virtual and core. We see these things as across really adding the new values. But if we look at what can we do with 4G and what can we do with what really is going to be brought in 5G, we see some interesting things. One is that some of the things we already know we're doing. We had quite a few announcements in the last couple of weeks about virtualization. Virtualized packet core has already started to happen in LTE. Mobile edge computing, we already know that this is becoming pervasive. But as we get further up into capacity and slicing, these are the new promises, but we're still not sure how we're going to use them. Then if we look at what are these capabilities going to bring, we see a lot of different services that people are talking about. Vertical IoT, novel services such as AR and VR, self-driving cars. How many people hear about self-driving cars nearly every day in the news? But then we look at things like mobile SD-WAN and enterprise collaboration. These are things that you can start experimenting with today on LTE. And we start to think, as we look here, at all of the things that we can start getting out of simple capabilities like enhanced mobile broadband or faster connect, and what we can monetize now. What we see is These are things around SD-WAN and fixed wireless access. We see that as we start to move over further to things that are much more interesting around changing industries, changing verticals, one of the challenges is the service provider has to understand these businesses in a new way, but also those businesses today are not using those mobility services, so they have to change their practices. So the level of sophistication of both the SP and the evolution of the ecosystem are significant to get over here to this promise. As we look going up here, the more interesting features such as ultra-low latency and so on that are what are going to support those services are the ones that have yet to be deployed and tested in the side of the service provider. The other piece that we look at is that the things down here are things that are cannibalistic to existing revenue. Because SD-WAN and mobile SD-WAN, those are going to eat into SD-WAN, already existing services. Fixed wireless access is going to eat into either existing fixed wireless or potentially into wireline services. So really, the question is, how do you get from this view to a place where you can actually start thinking about monetization? Now, what we really see as the pragmatic approach is to take on that MacCready approach, experimentation. If you can't experiment with services, you can't figure out whether you're going to be able to turn on that industry. You can't figure out what people are going to pay for. You can come up with ideas, but you don't want to be the company that spends a year of engineering, puts something up in the air for it to crash, and then go back to the drawing board for another year. You want to think about how you can pragmatically approach each of these things, get them into market, trial them, experiment with partners. This is a significant change in the way we operate today. Much of the way you look at, if you go around and you talk to a provider and you say, how long does it take you to deploy a new service? There's one answer, pretty much across the industry, 18 months. 18 months. And what we see is that those few providers that actually have focused on accelerating time to services, accelerating the customer's experience with turning something on and trialing it, are the ones that are moving the fastest in the market. So we really are saying that in the end, it's about how quickly you can experiment with new services. So how do you do that? You do that by thinking about how you can turn your network and your infrastructure into something that allows you to innovate rapidly. Just like MacCready focused on being able to quickly repair the plane, how can you focus on quickly being able to experiment? And that isn't just building faster capabilities in terms of automation and faster turnups. That's also thinking about partnerships. How are you going to engage with different partners, to trial with partners, to experiment with different companies in the industry? This is why, for example, at Cisco, we have focused on, in terms of business services, providing cloud-based services, which you can bring and onboard quickly in a matter of months. Because you can experiment faster with the market, you can bring things to market faster. It's a very different approach to things. So what we're really saying is, don't look for the killer use case. Look for the way that you can find the killer use case the fastest, through experimentation. Because the killer use case has yet to be identified. There's no one out there chasing the killer use case. They are talking about what might be a use case. And if you notice, it's all the technology people talking, it's not the business people talking. AR and VR is loved by engineers and loved by techie people. Business people look at it and they say, how am I going to make money off of that? Now, I'm not saying there's no money in that. I'm saying until you can figure out how to experiment with that and that you can find that killer use case, we ultimately be able to turn it into the real revenue. So how are you going to turn yourself into the fastest, most agile provider? How are you going to get there? This is where, as we look towards working with our customers on getting ready for 5G, there's build and experiment with 5G on the mobility side, but think about your network. Think about how you can rapidly build an infrastructure that allows you to experiment with new services, bring things to market rapidly. Who are your partners that you're working with? Who is the ecosystem you're working with? So we've been establishing sort of innovation centers around the globe in order to work with different customers and different partners and bring out new services and allow them to experiment with the customers. This is the only way we're going to get to the true belief and promise of 5G in terms of monetization. I do believe it is in the enterprise. I do believe it is in the verticals. But we have yet to actually put our finger on it as an industry and say, this is what's going to bring everybody money. So the only way to get there is to rapidly experiment together. So in the end, if you want to be the organization that brings a profitable 5G to market, you have to be thinking about that experimentation. You have to become the Paul MacCready of the industry. You have to think about where you're trying to take your organization and how you can experiment rapidly. Because that is, in the end, exactly where we're going to find the ultimate outcome for 5G. Because 5G holds a huge amount of promise for the industry. It holds a lot of hype. And I really spend enough time going around and talking to our customers to ask them, what is your business plan for 5G? The answer is, my business plan is to not be the one who doesn't do 5G, but I haven't figured out how to make the money in 5G. Tell us how to make money in 5G. The answer is, become the one who can most rapidly experiment with services and share your learnings. We'll share our learnings so that we can all get to the place where we understand what's going to move the market and move the market the quickest. So it is actually, it's the MacCready of the industry that is going to be the winner in the 5G race. Now, I know that this is the last talk of the day, and they started the beer about 17 minutes ago. So I'm wanting to know, if, as we get to this, who's going to experiment the fastest in order to get you to the beer the fastest. So I really want to say thank you today for coming, and I really want you to focus on thinking about how you're going to move your organization forward more quickly. Because when you can experiment quickly, when you can trial services and get customer feedback, that's when you'll understand where you're going to be able to monetize. And that's where you need to focus, is on transforming your infrastructure so that you can deploy services the fastest. So thank you very much. Have a great day.